I'm the daughter of a widow and brought up in the era when people had to ask for housekeeping money. And my father, my dear father, was intensely thrifty. And I used to sit there as a seething 8-year-old thinking, not me, not ever. I am going to have a man's job. My mother was at one moment the wife of an immensely successful, brilliant businessman. And 6 months later she wasn't, because my father died. And, you know, everything kind of dropped away. And I just thought, if that had happened to me, I would be much better placed than my mother was to cope. And in justice to her, she encouraged me. I was at a good North London grammar school, South Hampstead High School, where people stood on each other's faces to get into. And then I went to Cambridge from there, and this does not particularly do me any credit. My mother and 3 aunts and both grandmothers were at university. So that bit was easy. That bit did not require much other than being born where I was. The bit that came difficult was working afterwards, because nobody had done that. They'd all stopped at the end of a degree and married and not worked. I had the greatest possible difficulty getting articles. There I am, a good 2-1 out of Cambridge, and I applied to the top 4 London firms. Then, as now, people like Linklaters, Slaughters, Allen & Overy, and they all turned me down on the specific grounds that I was female and that I would probably get married and leave them. So at that point, never having believed that this would be necessary, I said to my mother, "What do I do?" And she said, "You have forgotten that your godfather is president of the Law Society." I had. It had never occurred to me to use influence or anything that wasn't my own heft. But he held an indignation meeting of the next sort of 6 London firms, all of whom were made to offer. And that's how I got my start. Then I did 2 years' worth of apprenticeship and went off to join my first husband at Harvard. And there I was with a qualification that did not run. I look back at this with amazement. I really wonder how I could have done this. I had a qualification that didn't run, and I was pretty close to taking a job as a waitress in order to put Mike through the 2nd year of the Harvard Business School. When my brother, who was out there doing a master's at the Fletcher School, rescued me, he introduced me to a company which was looking for people to play one of these diplomatic games, actually, of course, for their Ministry of Defense, as I didn't quite realize. They were trying to test whether you, by playing a game, you could arrive at a predictive result, something that would be useful in forecasting what was going to happen. In the end, we decided you couldn't. They decided you couldn't. I think they were right. But it was a wonderful training tool. Absolutely brilliant. Well, I would have stayed, I think, and done more of it, but my marriage broke up at that point. So after a bit, I just ran for home. And when I got home, I couldn't think what to do. I couldn't go back into the firm whence I had come, as I knew that wasn't going to work. But I had very much enjoyed, if you like, the new soft sciences, the new social sciences, which really wargaming is part of. So I went to political and economic planning. I got into the principal level, which is the 2nd step. I mean, the principals have considerable autonomy, and it would have been even better if I'd had any idea what I was doing, or how to answer a ministerial question, or even what was a ministerial question. But I was bailed out of all this by a voice on the telephone. And this grown-up voice on the telephone guided me through 6 months until I actually met him. Because it's like that in the civil service. You know people's voices and their minds as well as your own without having met them. Because that's how it runs. It all ran on the telephone. So here we are in the civil service. I'm married by now, and I then had, in 1975, I got the best job in the civil service, which was, the government had passed the Industrial Assistance Act, where if you were a failing company, you could apply to the government for assistance. Very new idea. And it was all based on the concept that you preserve jobs. And I had the bit of it that was preserving jobs in the areas of high unemployment, anyway, in almost all in the regional areas. And we didn't try and do this all by ourselves. At this point, the government grew some sense and recruited 4 very good senior people from industry and a dozen of the brightest and best out of the likes of Price Waterhouse and all those people to help them do it. And so they were really, we got the best people. And I rescued all sorts of things. Or rather, I didn't rescue them personally, but I would guide them through it, because we all really had to be one team. Didn't matter we were the lawyers or accountants, we were all one team. Two of my staff turned out to be ardent and very capable feminists who were trying to get a bit more justice into civil service employment, and above all, trying to get the right to decent part-time jobs. And we set up a meeting. We invited every senior woman in the civil service on the worst day of the year, in January, full of a snowstorm, and they all came. The hall filled. And I sat there shamefaced on the platform thinking, goodness, goodness, I'd never heard of all of this. What have I been doing? And we agreed at that meeting that we would ask for an all-female trade union, and we would stick by it, and we would not compromise, and we would seek that part-time employment be available to every woman in every grade in the civil service. And a few years later, there it was, the all-female civil service union, and rights for all women to apply for part-time jobs. In the end, I left the civil service. I did a heavy-duty negotiating job on aircraft and shipbuilding industries. And then I looked after I was responsible for British Steel right through the strike. I was then headhunted out to a smallish merchant bank, then called Charterhouse Jaffet. And they had not just a smallish merchant bank, they had a very good development capital bank, Charterhouse Development. The chap who headhunted me, I'd trained with. And he told me, years afterwards, that everybody had said, yeah, I mean, she looks terrific, but what if she can't cut it? I mean, what are we going to do? Can't just throw her back, can we? And Stuart drew himself up and said, I would remind you that Janet is a qualified solicitor. And every face round the boardroom cleared. They said, oh, well, we can use her on deals. I stayed in banking, oddly enough, because at that point, my bank was taken over by the Royal Bank of Scotland. And of course, security and everything descended. And I stayed there and started to do deals of my own and taught the bank how to get into the various places they wanted to get into. I was waiting for a deal to come off, and I started to write again at nights and revised the first book I'd ever written. I mean, it's so far revised that it just came out completely different because I knew a lot more by then. And in that one was published in 1988 and won the Beginner's Prize. And after that, I did one about every 18 months to 2 years for quite a long time. Never had time to do research. So I'd have to sit there and wait for the plot to come and stare me in the face. Death is very useful, because death is the one thing you have to do something about. The story cannot wave away from the fact that somebody's dead, and you've got to solve that particular problem. It's quite easy to juggle if you're only committed for 2 days a week, which I by then was. And the children were growing up, and I think I had 4 or 5 non-exec jobs by then. But there's still time round the corners in that. If you don't have to walk into an office every day and work, there's always time. I got all the good non-executive jobs because nobody had to worry, whether I could add or read a balance sheet or, understand the legal structure in which they worked. I just rolled my eyes when anybody suggested any of that. And indeed, they got to the stage where they didn't suggest any of that. They just thought, sorry. She's a lawyer, they used to say to each other. I could hear it. You could pretty much see a ticker tape running above their heads saying, she's a lawyer. I usually say that I probably wasn't on the A list, but I was sure as hell on the B list. Lifelong neighbour, female, lawyer. Wherever you put the card in, my name popped out. And I'd always kept in touch with the public sector and done a few jobs. I thought it would extend my career, because I knew I didn't want to retire at 65. All those things, but above all, I thought I could do good. I chaired a very useful committee right through the financial crisis. We did some good work, and I did some good legislative work. The advice I always give is qualify. Don't think a law degree will do it, won't. Qualify. Doesn't matter whether it's bar or solicitors. Qualify. They'll never believe you. They'll never be convinced if you've just had a law degree. Qualify. And then think quite carefully, after you're qualified, what you really like. What are you good at? It may unfortunately not be the thing they want you for. And I know shipping lawyers who are desperately trying not to be shipping lawyers. You just have to be brave at that point. But don't be frightened of not going on or career breaks. You'll always get somewhere. If you sit tight and work out, you'll always work.